Welcome, week 7. Hope you're all doing well. This is it. 2 more weeks. This week, and then their finals next week. So we're almost done. So this week we're covering chapters 13 and 14, public key infrastructure, encryption, which is a really good topic, and testing. So that's what we're going to be looking at. Some of you might have been in my other class on encryption, but encryption we have a whole course on. We're going to cover a real basic concept of encryption today. What is the public key infrastructure, or PKI, and how important that is. The certificate of authority, registration, certificate servers and repositories, and the difference between encryption and how it's important, and we use it every day. Every time you're on the internet, something's encrypted. Well, guess what? We can use that for also our remote users. We can use it for our systems, making sure our website's encrypted. How do we go about that? How do we communicate with our vendors? All this data has to be encrypted. So we're going to take a look at the encryption process and how important it is to securing our data. So we have symmetric encryption, which is an algorithm that uses shared keys for the encryption and decryption of the process, or encryption, whatever you want to call it. And basically, if a hacker gets the key, our system's been compromised. So it's important that we keep that encryption process, the encryption information, secret, that we don't let that out. And we have asymmetric, which uses a pair of related keys, a public and a private key. So we send out a public key so someone uses it, and we have the private key to encrypt it or de-encrypt it once we get it. The encryption process makes sure that all our data is encrypted. So, how many people are involved depends on the more people that are involved, the more keys you're going to need. So, if we take a look at the encryption process, symmetric starts out that if you need fewer keys if you only have a few people involved. But when it becomes more people involved, the asymmetric is a much better way to go. So if you're dealing over the internet, you probably want to use the asymmetric because it allows public people to get, or has that public key side, and we don't have to produce as many keys. And having the keys are an important part of that. Cryptology is a very important of everything. We have the registration authority, or the certificate of authority. This is a third party that actually ensures who we are, who we say they are. So if we're going to do business with someone, we want to make sure that we go through this process because we want to make sure that they are who they say they are. And this is kind of what the encryption process is all about. Obviously, the key length is an important part. The longer the key, the harder it is going to be to encrypt or to break. So we want to make sure we have a nice secure key as we're looking at what we're covering. Digital signatures. It's becoming a very big thing nowadays with the way our systems are worked. Digital signatures allow us to ensure that the data hasn't been compromised. And it uses something called a hash to ensure that that data has not been changed at all. The hash function gives us and no matter how big it is, if I say it's a 16-bit hash, it's always going to give me the same size outcome, 16 bits, no matter what it is, whether it's one word or an entire document. So hashing, what it really does is it takes a snapshot of that picture or that document, and if any changes were done to it, we know that that was changed, and then we can know that that process, that document's been compromised. So hashing allows us to verify that the document is completely unchanged. If you just put a space in it, well then that's what, that changes the thing. Hidden characters, it changes the hash. So the hashing is an important part of digital signatures to ensure that it hasn't been modified at all. Let's see, we're going to look in how we're going to implement cryptology in our system. We're going to look at certificates of authorities, and that's basically a real overview of what it is. Like I said, we get into depth in this in an entire class on cryptology. We're going to look also at testing. How do we test the system? One of the things when I started out in the IT field, I was a UAT tester, and I would test from a user acceptance point of view, but part of my testing would break into the network and break the network. So understanding that testing is an important part of every software. It's part of the system development lifecycle, And you can't overlook testing. Testing allows us to ensure that what we've put in place is there. There are no holes, that we didn't forget about putting something in there. We didn't forget about putting in some documentation, or there's no back doors for someone to get in. The testing process involves making sure we have an exact plan. We're not going to randomly just test stuff. We want to track everything that we test. Usually what we do is have a plan. This is what we're going to test. We're going to test for intrusion. We're going to test for breaches, gap analysis, any vulnerability. So we're going to look at this, but we're going to put together a whole plan on what we're going to do to make sure we don't leave out any scenarios. The plan is just that. It allows us to look at different areas that we can have. There's also software that we could put in place that allows us to do testing. It will test for open ports. It will test documents. Test the server to make sure the ports are closed, to ensure that everything is there. After the test, we got to make sure we do a cleanup. Sometimes we might open a certain port to get in. Well, now we got to make sure we close that port, that we don't leave it open, so it becomes a vulnerability for what we're doing. We're going to be testing the LAN, the WAN, and sometimes we might even hire a third party to come in and do the testing for us. Well, was one of the big things that we would do where I used to work. We'd hire a third party. They say, all right, we're going to make an attack between January 1st, March 31st. You have no idea when it's coming, so we couldn't prepare for it. They just know we're going to have a penetration test done. And that allows us to take a look at, and then they report back to us the findings. They were able to get in, whether it was using social engineering, which sometimes it could be, or it was a brute force attack, or they found a back door, or port was open because one of the vendors left it open. So there's a lot of different things that we can go about. What are the vulnerabilities? How are we going to fix it? And then what is our plan to take care of all these things? So these are some of the things that we're going to be covering in the week 7, which is chapters 13 and 14. So this week, what do we have due on tap? If we take a look in our system, week 7, in the lecture notes, you're going to have your PowerPoint thing, and you also have a cryptology in our lives, a TED video. Again, you can respond to that through the discussion questions. Take a look at those, see what you think. You will have discussion questions. Let's take a look at what we have in the assignment folder. We have why do companies care about cryptology? 2 or 3 page paper, APA format as usual. Your 2 discussion questions. I said you can reply to one of that TED Talk video if you want. It doesn't replace your initial, but it does give you information if you want to do that. You have a quiz and your journal. Also, remember, next week is a short week. It's our last week. It's a little bit short, so you'll have your midterm opened up. Your final. And make sure that you take that. I believe so it just closes early. Please be aware of that. Also, remember, have a wonderful weekend, and remember to smile.